At nearly 12,500 feet below the surface, there is a room where the world's elite once dined under electric light. After 113 years on the floor of the Atlantic, this space still holds clues about luxury, routine, and structural collapse. What remains when wood, steel, and porcelain face a century of crushing pressure? Today, we explore the first-class dining saloon of the Titanic and what can still be safely documented there. Before we move deeper into this unstable historic interior, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us through the end of this exploration. We move slowly along the Titanic's hull, keeping our distance to avoid contact with unstable structures. Corrosion runs deep. Large steel plates show clear signs of progressive collapse. First-class windows appear warped and crushed after decades under pressure. This section signals our proximity to the former dining saloon. As we continue forward, the hull's structural pattern begins to change. Openings widen, revealing distorted internal partitions. Window alignment and reinforced framing point to a large original space. Everything indicates the dining saloon area. External collapse has created an irregular access point, surrounded by unstable debris. We reduce speed and fine-tune buoyancy before advancing. The opening leads directly into a vast interior space. Light reveals an uneven floor, collapsed structures, and layers of accumulated sediment. This environment matches the first-class dining saloon. Before proceeding, we assess stability, particle circulation, and safe routes. With our position stabilized, the submersible moves into the saloon. Twisted doorways and collapsed partitions mark former circulation paths. Wood fragments and exposed metal fittings reveal the type of finishes once used here. Even after more than a century, decorative patterns can still be identified on preserved wall sections. The placement of columns and partitions allows us to reconstruct the saloon's original layout. Tables once stood in orderly rows with side aisles designed for service, metal anchor points embedded in the floor mark where furniture was secured. Today's deformation reflects both the initial impact and decades of gradual structural failure. Lighting exposes stark contrasts between materials. Metal elements endured far better over time, while wooden panels lost thickness and shape. In some areas, cladding has vanished entirely, exposing internal framing. This degradation pattern helps distinguish what collapsed during the sinking from what gave way slowly over the years. As the submersible advances, the risk of collapse increases. Portions of the saloon are nearly unrecognizable, with ceilings and walls yielding to the weight of time. Yet visible details still hint at the luxury this space once held. Certain sections survived thanks to early isolation during collapse, shielding them from later damage. Among the wreckage, smaller objects help confirm the room's function. Porcelain fragments, dishware pieces, and decorative elements emerge from the sediment. Their distribution marks where tables and service corridors once stood. Their survival depended on collapse patterns and internal water movement. As we move toward the center of the saloon, instability increases. The floor shows visible sagging and steel plates remain partially suspended. Minor disturbances stir fine sediment, reducing visibility. These signs point to a structurally compromised zone, demanding heightened caution. Further in, the floor shows clear signs of failure. Steel plates sway slightly, producing muffled echoes that ripple through the enclosed space. Each propulsion adjustment lifts fine sediment, lowering visibility and increasing the risk of accidental contact. Explorations like this depend on continuous documentation. Subscribe to follow more underwater historical analyses. As progress slows, subtle vibrations travel through the saloon. Loose structures react to the submersible's movement, emitting dull sounds that signal ongoing instability. Visibility fluctuates as sediment remains suspended. Each advance requires minute corrections to avoid fragile plates and supports. In this section, floor displacement becomes more pronounced. Internal structures yield slowly, reacting to even slight flow changes. The enclosed space amplifies creaks and cracks, making their source difficult to pinpoint. Navigation must be constantly adjusted to avoid unstable surfaces. Here, structural integrity is minimal. Loose plates sway easily, and any propulsion adjustment shifts the environment's balance. Muffled echoes travel through the saloon, signaling movement beyond the visual field. Progress demands frequent pauses for stabilization and total vibration reduction. The final advance in this section marks the safe limit of exploration. The floor gives way in isolated spots, and suspended structures react to any flow change. Sediment hangs in the water, obscuring spatial awareness. Moving beyond this point sharply increases collapse risk, signaling a transition into direct conflict with the environment. Attempting to cross the saloon's center requires extreme precision. The ceiling shows advanced deformation, and structural elements respond to the slightest disturbance. The space is vast, but profoundly unstable. Navigation becomes deliberately slow, with nearly imperceptible adjustments to prevent vibrations that could trigger collapse. Midway through the crossing, part of the inner ceiling suddenly gives way. The shift releases a dense cloud of long-settled particles into the saloon. Visibility drops to near zero. Navigation now relies on sensors and ultra-controlled movements to avoid contact with collapsed structures. With visibility severely compromised, forward movement becomes impossible. The submersible initiates a slow retreat, guided by instruments and minimal distance references. Small course corrections prevent contact with unseen structures. At this point, exploration gives way to preservation of both the vehicle and the archaeological site. As the submersible pulls back from the collapse zone, particle density begins to decrease. The saloon's outlines re-emerge in fragments. Retreat remains slow and controlled, with full priority given to avoiding unstable structures. Spatial clarity gradually returns, revealing areas less affected by the collapse. With partial visibility restored, we can assess the damage. The saloon's central section suffered severe collapse, while adjacent areas remained relatively protected. Controlled retreat confirms that advancing further would likely trigger additional failures. The exploration shifts toward preserved sectors, opening the door to unexpected discoveries. As stability improves, suspended sediment begins to settle. With visibility returning, details once hidden by the recent collapse come into view. Decorative fragments and small objects become distinguishable on the floor. The collapse, by isolating this area, created an unexpectedly preserved zone within the saloon. Advancing reveals structural elements rarely seen in this part of the ship. Sections of the staircase leading into the saloon emerge from the debris, with steps still recognizable. Ornamental moldings fixed to the walls suggest this section was shielded by earlier collapses, limiting water flow and object displacement. In this isolated area, object placement suggests minimal disturbance after the sinking. Portions of furniture remain aligned, indicating a collapse pattern that protected the space. The absence of strong internal currents allowed chairs, supports, and larger fragments to stay close to their original positions. With sediment nearly settled, the space reveals an unusual level of preservation. Objects remain close to where they once stood, suggesting limited post-collapse interference. This area acts as a time capsule, offering a clearer picture of the saloon's use and organization shortly before the sinking. The saloon, now nearly fully revealed, holds its final secret. A partially toppled table with chairs still aligned suggests a moment frozen in time. A shattered crystal glass rests among the debris, its surface reflecting light for the first time in over a century. This moment captures the intersection of tragedy and preservation, where history and collapse meet in a single frame. With conditions stable, the submersible documents the scene in detail: the fallen table, aligned chairs, and scattered fragments. Light traces twisted metal supports and degraded wooden surfaces, searching for patterns of differential preservation. Focus returns to the broken glass, recording reflections and fractured edges before withdrawal. With documentation complete, the submersible begins its controlled exit. Illumination slowly fades, allowing sediment to settle back onto the floor. The saloon loses definition, returning to the constant twilight of the deep Atlantic. The space remains untouched, a fragile archaeological site where every object rests exactly where the sinking left it.
According to the user prompt, specifically the audio policy, there should be no dialogue, narration, or subtitles.